The owl is sitting upon a different pinnacle of Mount Improbable. It has good eyes, but they're used in very dim light, and it relies more upon its ears. It has asymmetrical ears, which enable it to localize its prey with pinpoint accuracy in total and complete darkness. Its wings are very different from the eagle's wings, and they're shaped so that they make it fly very quietly at night. It's a stealth fighter. Both these birds, in addition to having beautiful eyes and ears, have superb wings, which brings us into our next topic. Could we see some wings, do you think? Is it possible to? Look at those wings. Does the owl do it as well? Lovely. Beautiful. Thank you very, very much indeed. Let's see some film of wings in action. This is a hawk. And watch the way it controls the shape of the wing in gliding. Now watch it flapping. Not entirely surprisingly, creationists are also very fond of wings. And they once again make a similar point about what's the good of half a wing, what's the good of 3/4 of a wing. How could something like those wings have evolved from the silly little wing stubs that must have been there at the beginning of the evolution of wings? Well, let's tackle this with another little Bryson special. These are not exactly flying creatures. They live up trees, and they have wings to show they're creatures. They also have little eyes to show that they're creatures. They live up trees, and if they were to fall from the trees, they would have been at risk of breaking their necks. Thank you. Both of them, in this case, from this low height, one with a little skirt and without a little skirt, survive the breakage. At this depth, you don't need a little wing. This is a wing stub, call it a flange or a wing stub. It's not become a wing, but we're looking at the ancestral stub that might eventually have evolved into a wing. When the height is sufficiently low, then nobody's going to break their neck. But if we raise the thing a bit, very carefully, sometimes these animals are going to find themselves leaping from higher branches. And from higher branches, it may be that these little, even pathetic little wing stubs like this might make a difference. Let's see what happens now. Right. Now, in this case, from that higher level, even a little wing stub like this can make a difference. And once you've got the evolution of a wing stub this long, then natural selection may favour the wing stub getting a bit longer still, because there's going to be an even higher height that you could fall from, where the difference between a wing stub that high and between a wing stub that high might make a difference. And the point is that we have a smooth gradient all the way up higher and higher heights that you could fall from, to drive the lineage, to drive the species towards ever longer wings. Controlled gliding has in fact evolved many times over. There are many creatures that have the equivalent of half a wing. This is a snake, a tree snake, crawling along a tree. So far it looks like an ordinary snake. But now it launches itself off, a slow motion picture. The body flattens out sideways and catches the air. It's steering itself down, and it's going to land on another tree without hurting itself. This you can think of as the first step towards evolving wings. Snakes never have evolved wings, but that's one possible pathway towards evolving wings. Now here's a squirrel, a tree squirrel, so-called flying squirrel, that has flaps of skin between its arms and its legs, and it glides with them. This is a very beautifully controlled glide. It's downhill all the way. It doesn't flap, it doesn't climb. But it lands gracefully on a neighboring tree. And is completely unhurt when it does so. This is an animal, again, with something like 50% of a wing. And the third example is a lizard. In this case, it has skin stretched between its ribs. All these are different ways in which wings might have evolved. In no case did they properly evolve, but they show what the beginnings of wings might have looked like. So not only can you do well if you have half a wing or a quarter of a wing, but lots of animals actually do. This is a flying lemur. Looks like the flying squirrel we just saw, but it's totally unrelated. It comes from Southeast Asia, has nothing to do with it. And I think you can easily imagine how that could eventually give rise to something like that, a flying fox, which is a bat. That has proper wings, that's as good as a hawk. That can fly and flap properly. So we've dealt with two problems of what is the use of a kind, the eye and the wing. Our third difficult problem, camouflage, has been thought difficult for a slightly different reason. Think back to our stick insects. And think of the fantastic detail with which they mimic sticks. A stick insect you could think of as being right at the top of Mount Improbable. So let's put it up there, the lovely one, thank you. But that has somehow to have evolved from something at the bottom. And I'm going to put on the bottom something that doesn't look remotely like a stick, this brown bug. And somehow we have to imagine that there was a gradual progression all the way up the slope, all the way around the path here, from something like that to something like that. Now here's the problem. It's birds selecting insects that are propelling these animals up Mount Improbable, that are propelling evolution. And in order for the birds to have propelled the last 1% from 99% like a stick to 100% like a stick, the birds must have had astonishingly good vision. They must have been very clever in order to be fooled by, in order to need, rather, the precise detail of mimicry in order to fool them. But here's the problem. Those very same birds, or relatives of them, had to have been fooled down the bottom of Mount Improbable by insects that hardly look like sticks at all. Because it's the same birds propelling the insects from 1% like a stick to 2% like a stick that have to propel the insects all the way up the path, 20 to 21%, 99 to 100%. And, say, opponents of the Darwinian theory, you can't have it both ways. Either the birds are clever enough to do that job of natural selection, or they're stupid enough to do that job of natural selection, but they can't be both. Well, you might like to think to yourself about possible solutions to that riddle. One thing you might think of is that it's not the same birds, that perhaps the birds have been evolving during the same time as the insects have been evolving. But I don't like that theory for reasons I haven't time to go into. I rather prefer to think that it's the same birds, they were just as clever at all stages of evolution, had just as good eyesight, but the seeing conditions were not always as good. Here we have a woodland floor, which has 16 insects on it. And from where you're sitting, you can probably see some of them. And that's really the point. The seeing conditions from a distance are such that you can only see some of them. Similarly, if I look out of the corner of my eye, I can now see one or two of them, but not all of them. I'm going to narrow down the discussion to just distance, and I'd like to call for a volunteer to help me with this. Right, thank you. What's your name? Annie. Come here, Annie, please. Now, where's the pointer? Thank you. Stand here. Now, tell me, how many insects can you see? Just point to one. We'd like to take the pointer and point to it. Which ones can you see? Can you see any?